My name is Richard Hale, and at 65 years old, I never thought I would be telling a story like this. I worked my whole life with honest hands and tired bones, building a home that was more than just walls and a roof. It was a place where memories lived, where my late wife's laughter still echoed in the hallways, and where I had raised my only son, Daniel. Every brick of that house carried pieces of me, and I thought it would always be my safe place. I was wrong. When I retired from my job as a construction foreman, I felt proud of the life I had made. The house, sitting quietly on a large corner lot in the suburbs, had been my crown jewel. I never saw it as just property. It was the story of my life, from the swing I had built in the backyard for Daniel when he was 5, to the little garden my wife tended until her final days. I planned to live out the rest of my years there, slowly, peacefully. But peace has a way of slipping through your fingers when betrayal comes from the one person you thought you could trust most. It started small. Daniel, now in his late 30s, began visiting me more often. At first, I was happy. I had missed him. His life had gotten busy after he married and started a business. We didn't always see eye to eye, but I thought that was normal between fathers and sons. So when he began asking questions about the house, how much it was worth, whether I had considered downsizing, or if I had thought about moving somewhere easier to manage, I brushed it off as concern. He kept saying, "Dad, it's a lot of space for just you." I told him I was fine, but he never seemed satisfied with my answers. One afternoon, as we sat in the living room, he leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Dad, you could live more comfortably with less stress if you sold this place. You don't need all this. Think of it like an opportunity." I smiled weakly, shaking my head. "Son, this house is not just a building. It's my home. I've put my life into it." He nodded, but I could see the frustration simmering behind his polite smile. I didn't know it then, but something darker was brewing. Weeks went by. Daniel's visits became more insistent. He would bring his wife, Claire, and she would add her voice to his. "Richard," she said once with a tone that was sweet but carried an edge, "it's not safe for you here alone. Big houses like this, they're too much for someone your age." Her words stung. Too much for someone my age. Was I really becoming a burden to my own home? I tried to push the thought away, but the seed had been planted. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Friday morning. I had gone out to run errands, nothing unusual. When I came back, Daniel was waiting for me in the driveway. He looked tense, holding an envelope in his hand. Without even greeting me, he said, "Dad, we need to talk." We walked inside. I remember the way my hands trembled as I set my keys on the counter. He slid the envelope across the table. Inside was a check. $15,000. My eyes darted up to his face, confused, searching for answers. "What's this?" I asked, my voice thin. "It's yours," he said, almost too quickly. "Your share. I sold the house." The words hit me like a hammer to the chest. I couldn't even process them at first. "You, what? You sold my house?" "Our house," he corrected, his tone firm. "Legally, I had the authority. It was a good deal, Dad. $1.2 million. This is what you get. You can use it to move somewhere smaller, easier. It's better for you." My knees went weak, and I had to grab the edge of the chair to steady myself. The room spun. Every sound seemed muffled, as though I were underwater. My son, the boy I had raised, the one I had sacrificed so much for, had gone behind my back and sold the very foundation of my life. I looked at the check in my hands. 15,000. Out of 1.2 million. It was like he had carved up my life and handed me the scraps. "Daniel," I whispered, my throat tight, "how could you do this to me?" His eyes hardened. "Dad, you don't understand. You don't need that much money. I invested the rest. I put it where it will grow. Trust me, this is for the best." But trust was already broken. Shattered. In that moment, I realized something had shifted in him, something I didn't recognize anymore. My son was no longer the boy who once ran through the garden with grass stains on his knees. He had become someone I couldn't reach. I wanted to scream, to rage, to demand every dollar back, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I felt an ache that was worse than anger. It was betrayal in its rawest form. For days after, I wandered through the empty rooms, touching the walls, the furniture, the old photographs. Everything felt temporary now, like I was just a guest in what had once been mine. Boxes started appearing, not packed by me, but by Daniel and Claire. They were preparing for me to leave, as though I were a burden they couldn't wait to remove. The nights were the hardest. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of how the boy I raised could have done this. My wife's picture sat on the nightstand, her eyes kind and gentle, as though she were silently asking me to be strong. But I felt weak. Powerless. Neighbors began to notice something was wrong. Mrs. Turner, who had lived next door for over 30 years, asked why there was a "for sale" sign on my lawn. My throat tightened as I forced a smile and muttered something about changes. I couldn't bear to admit the truth, that my own flesh and blood had sold the ground under my feet. Each conversation with Daniel grew colder. He kept insisting that I was being dramatic, that I should be grateful. Grateful. That word burned like acid. How could I be grateful for losing everything? But then came the moment that made the wound even deeper. One evening, I overheard Daniel on the phone in the kitchen. His voice was low, urgent, but I caught fragments. "Yeah, we'll use the money for the business. No, he won't fight it, he doesn't have the energy." That was when the truth settled in. The house wasn't sold for me. It wasn't about safety, or comfort, or a better life for his old man. It was for him. For his gain. For his ambitions. And suddenly, the check in my pocket felt like nothing more than hush money. I stood there in the shadows, listening to him laugh softly on the call, and I realized something broke in me that night. Not just trust, but the bond between father and son. A bond one thought could never be destroyed. I didn't confront him right away. I wanted to. My chest ached with words unsaid, but I couldn't bring myself to face him yet. Part of me still clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, he would look at me and see the father who gave him everything. But hope, I was learning, was dangerous. And so, with my house already gone and my future uncertain, I stood in the wreckage of my life, trying to figure out what pieces I could still hold on to. My son had taken the home, the security, and the trust one had built over a lifetime. But there were still choices I could make. I just didn't know what they would be yet. The story of what happened next was only beginning. And as much as it hurt, I knew I couldn't let it end here. The days after the house was sold felt like I was living in a fog. Every morning, I would wake up in what used to be my bedroom, only to remind myself that it was no longer mine. I was just a guest in a house already spoken for. Daniel kept telling me it was temporary, that soon I would move into a new place he had in mind. But every word from him felt like salt on an open wound. Temporary or not, the fact remained that my life had been ripped out from under me without my permission. I wandered the hallways, touching the walls, running my fingers over the door frames, remembering the years spent here. The dents in the staircase banister where Daniel's toy cars used to slam against it, the worn spot in the living room carpet where my wife always sat during movie nights, even the chipped paint on the kitchen cupboards that I never got around to fixing, every imperfection told the story of a life lived. And now, it was someone else's story to own. Daniel noticed my silence, but he mistook it for agreement. He thought I was adjusting, maybe even softening. In truth, I was burying anger so deep that it threatened to choke me if I let it surface. I tried to remind myself that he was my son, the boy I once carried on my shoulders, the child who had once looked at me with unshakable trust. But those memories clashed violently with the man standing in front of me now, the man who had stolen everything. One afternoon, Daniel drove me to a small apartment complex across town. It was cramped, surrounded by busy streets and noisy neighbors. The paint was peeling, the hallway smelled of mildew, and the elevator creaked like it might give out at any second. "This is practical, Dad," he said, his voice sharp with authority. "It's close to everything you need, easy to maintain, and safe. It's perfect." Perfect. The word tasted bitter. I stared at the narrow space, the tiny kitchen, the single bedroom, and I felt smaller than I ever had before. My home had once been wide, filled with sunlight and echoes of laughter. This place felt like a box, something you put away and forget about. I looked at Daniel, hoping he would see my disappointment, my pain, but his eyes were elsewhere, already on his phone, already thinking about something else. I moved into the apartment a week later. Not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. The house wasn't mine anymore, and Daniel made it clear that dragging things out would only make it harder. I packed what little I could, leaving behind more than I could carry. I left the swing in the backyard. I left my wife's garden, now overgrown but still precious. I left decades of memories sealed inside walls that no longer welcomed me. When I shut the door of the apartment for the first time, the silence inside felt cruel, suffocating. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the check Daniel had given me. $15,000. My life reduced to a slip of paper. Days bled into weeks. I tried to keep busy, reading, walking, watching television, but everything felt empty. Sometimes I caught myself waiting for my wife to come into the room, or expecting Daniel to call and ask if I wanted to grab lunch. But the calls never came, and the room stayed empty. The loneliness was heavier than I had ever known. Then one evening, as I sat staring at the muted glow of the television, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, Mrs. Turner, my old neighbor from next door, stood there with a small bag of groceries. Her face was etched with concern. "Richard," she said softly, "I heard what happened. I can't believe Daniel did that. Are you okay? The kindness in her voice nearly broke me. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to simply ask if I was okay. My throat tightened, and for the first time since everything unraveled, I let tears fall. She set the groceries down on the counter and sat with me, listening as I spoke in halting sentences about what had happened. She didn't judge, she didn't interrupt, she just listened. Her compassion gave me something I hadn't felt in weeks: strength. And with that strength came a question I had been too afraid to ask myself: what could I do about this? Was I doomed to accept the scraps Daniel handed me? Or could I fight for what was rightfully mine? I started small. I pulled out old papers, documents, anything I could find from when I purchased the house, from when I added Daniel's name to certain accounts after his mother passed. My memory wasn't as sharp as it once was, but I began piecing together how he might have had the authority to sell without telling me. It was like retracing steps in a maze I hadn't realized I was walking into. Every discovery stung. I realized that years ago, when I was grieving my wife's death, I had trusted Daniel with too much. I had signed papers without fully reading them, letting him handle the details, because I didn't have the strength. Back then, I thought he was protecting me. Now I understood he had been preparing for this all along. The realization made my stomach turn. How long had he been planning this? How long had my own son been looking at me not as a father, but as an obstacle to what he wanted? Late at night, I would sit in the small apartment kitchen, the documents spread out before me, trying to make sense of it all. The anger grew, but so did something else, a quiet resolve. Maybe I couldn't undo the past, but perhaps I could stop him from taking more. Then came another blow. A letter arrived in the mail, addressed to me but clearly meant to push me further down. It was a notice that my medical insurance premiums were increasing. My finances, already fragile, were stretched thinner. I couldn't help but think of the $1.2 million Daniel had pocketed. That money could have secured my future, given me comfort, dignity. Instead, I sat in a dingy apartment, worrying about how to pay bills. I picked up the phone one evening and called him. My voice shook, but I kept it steady enough. Daniel, we need to talk. This can't go on like this. There was a pause on the other end, then a sigh. Dad, I already told you, everything is handled. You don't need to worry. Just focus on relaxing, okay? Relaxing. The word made me clench my fist. Relaxing? I said, my voice rising. You took my home. You left me with scraps. And you expect me to sit here and relax? His voice hardened. You don't understand the bigger picture. I'm making moves that will benefit us both. But you're too stuck in the past to see it. Trust me, Dad. One day, you'll thank me. The call ended with me staring at the phone in disbelief. Thank him? Thank him for betrayal? Thank him for stripping me of the life I had built? My chest ached, but my mind sharpened. I couldn't let this be the end of my story. I began reaching out quietly. I spoke to an old friend, a retired lawyer who had once helped me draft my will. His voice was cautious but firm. Richard, if what you're telling me is true, you might have a case. But it won't be easy. This will mean going against your son in court. Are you ready for that? The question hung heavy in the air. Was I ready to take my own flesh and blood to court? The thought tore at me. But as I looked around the small apartment, the walls closing in, I realized the greater betrayal would be doing nothing. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of purpose. Still, doubt lingered. Nights were restless. I thought about the years of love I had poured into raising Daniel, the sacrifices I had made. I thought about his first steps, his first day of school, the pride I felt when he graduated. Could I really turn all of that into a legal battle? Could I stand in a courtroom and look him in the eye, knowing the bond between us would never be the same? But then I remembered his voice on the phone, cold, dismissive, telling someone else that I didn't have the energy to fight. He had counted on me to stay silent, to accept what he had done. And maybe that was the final betrayal, that he believed his father was too weak to stand up for himself. I wasn't ready to make my decision yet. But I knew one thing, the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And as I stared at the pile of documents, at the check that sat mocking me from the nightstand, I promised myself that whatever came next, I would not let him write the ending of my life for me. The silence of the apartment was heavy, but beneath it, something stirred in me, a quiet strength, waiting to rise. The days ahead were uncertain, and the road would be hard, but one truth was clear: this was only the beginning. The nights in that small apartment grew longer, stretching into endless hours where sleep felt like a stranger. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sounds of traffic outside. My mind refused to rest. Images of Daniel as a little boy, running across the yard with a toy airplane in his hand, blurred into the memory of him standing coldly across from me, shoving a check into my hand as if my life had a price tag. The weight of betrayal pressed down harder each day. I began to notice the little cracks in myself. Forgetting to eat meals, losing track of time, waking up in the middle of the night with my heart racing. Loneliness gnawed at me like a slow, quiet hunger. The walls of the apartment, already bare and lifeless, seemed to close in tighter every day. I missed my home, not just the house itself, but the feeling of belonging, the safety of knowing I had a place in the world that was mine. Now, I felt like a guest in my own life. Mrs. Turner checked in often. She would bring meals, sometimes just sit with me in silence, her presence comforting in ways words couldn't be. One evening, as she poured tea into mismatched cups in my tiny kitchen, she looked at me with steady eyes. "Richard, you can't let him take everything from you. Not just the house, but your dignity too. You have to fight back." Her words struck me like a spark in dry wood. Fight back. But how? I was 65, tired, with limited money and no appetite for battles. Daniel had the resources, the confidence, and a cruel kind of ambition that I never could match. Still, the thought clung to me. Maybe I wasn't too weak. Maybe I wasn't too old. Maybe I still had something left to fight with. The retired lawyer I had spoken to, Alan, agreed to meet me in person. We sat in his small office that smelled faintly of dust and old books. He listened as I went through everything again, laying out the documents I had found. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the papers, occasionally tapping a finger against his desk. "This is complicated," he finally said. "You signed over more authority to your son than you realized. But that doesn't mean you're powerless. The way he handled the sale, the money, there may be legal grounds here. But Richard, this will tear open wounds you may never heal." "I don't know if they can be healed anyway," I said quietly. "He's not the boy I raised anymore. If I don't stand up now, what am I left with?" Alan studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we start. Carefully. Quietly. You'll need to prepare yourself, because this will not be easy." Walking back to my apartment that day, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. Fear of the storm I was about to step into, but relief that I was finally taking steps toward something instead of just drowning in silence. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small thread of control return to my hands. But Daniel wasn't oblivious. He sensed the shift. When he visited me unexpectedly one Saturday morning, his demeanor was different. Less polite, more guarded. He looked around the apartment with a kind of impatience, as though the place offended him. "Dad," he said, his voice tight, "I've heard you've been talking to people. Lawyers. Why are you making this difficult?" My heart raced, but I forced myself to meet his eyes. "Because you made it difficult first. You took what wasn't yours to take." His jaw clenched, his eyes flashing. "I did what was best for you. You don't see it now, but you will. You're not thinking clearly anymore." The insult stung, but I didn't let it show. "I'm thinking clearer than you realize," I said. "And I won't stay silent while you steal my life." For a moment, his mask slipped. I saw the anger, the fear, the greed. Then he composed himself, offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Careful, Dad. You don't want to make enemies out of family." When he left, the silence he left behind was heavier than before. But under that weight was resolve. He thought he could scare me into submission, but fear had already lived with me too long. It had nothing left to take. The weeks that followed became a quiet war. Alan guided me through the steps, filing the first motions, gathering evidence, preparing me for what was to come. I kept most of it to myself, not wanting to involve neighbors or even Mrs. Turner too deeply, though she could see the changes in me. She saw the long nights, the tired eyes, but also the steel beginning to form in my voice when I spoke of Daniel. There were moments, though, when the pain would break through the armor. Late one night, I found myself flipping through an old photo album I had managed to bring from the house. There was Daniel at 5, missing a front tooth, grinning proudly as he held up a fish we had caught at the lake. There he was at 17, standing beside me at his high school graduation, my arm slung proudly around his shoulder. Looking at those photos, I felt something in me fracture all over again. How had we gone from that boy, smiling with innocent eyes, to this man who could betray me so coldly? The ache in my chest felt unbearable, but I kept turning the pages, as if searching for answers hidden in the glossy paper. I began to notice Daniel growing distant. His calls became less frequent, and when they did come, they were clipped, cautious. He was busy, always busy. His business, his plans, his life, all consuming. But I knew the truth. He was avoiding me because he knew the ground beneath his feet was shifting. He knew I wasn't the passive father he had counted on me to be. One day, out of the blue, Claire showed up at my apartment. She was dressed immaculately as always, her perfume filling the tiny space the moment she stepped inside. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't warm the room. "Richard," she began, her tone sugar-coated, "Daniel is worried about you. He thinks you're letting people get into your head. Lawyers, neighbors, whoever. You're making things harder than they need to be. I stayed seated, my hands folded tightly together. Claire, what Daniel did was wrong. You know it as well as I do. Her eyes narrowed slightly. What's done is done. You should accept it and move on. This fighting will only hurt you. And us? There it was, us. Not me, not family, but them. I realized then that she had been part of this all along, maybe even the voice that pushed Daniel toward it. She didn't want me to fight because my silence benefited her too. Claire, I said quietly, you can take the house, you can take the money, but you won't take my voice. Not anymore. The mask slipped for a brief moment, and I saw the coldness in her eyes. Then she smiled again, stood, and left without another word. The scent of her perfume lingered, cloying and heavy, long after she was gone. The days grew heavier with preparation. Meetings with Alan, phone calls, paperwork that seemed endless. Each step was exhausting, but with each one I felt a little stronger, a little more alive. The weight of betrayal still pressed down on me, but it no longer pinned me to the ground. I was standing again, even if my knees shook. Yet, in the quiet moments, doubt still crept in. Was I doing the right thing? Was there still a chance, however slim, that Daniel could come back to me, that the son I remembered could return? Or was I burning the last bridge between us by pushing forward? I didn't know the answers. All I knew was that silence had already cost me too much. One night, as rain battered the window and the city lights blurred in the distance, I sat in the dark, listening to the storm outside. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel powerless. I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. The storm was loud, but inside me there was a quiet, steady flame. Small, but growing. The path ahead was uncertain. Painful, even. But the story of what came next was still unwritten. And I knew, deep in my bones, that I wasn't finished yet. The night stretched endlessly, with silence wrapping around the house like a suffocating shroud. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every word that had been spoken earlier. The house I had built with years of sweat and sacrifice had been sold, and the betrayal was so sharp that I could almost feel it cutting into me each time I remembered. My son's face haunted me, the smugness in his tone, the false comfort in his words, and that pitiful check he handed me as if my entire life's work could be reduced to a scrap of paper. Every corner of this house held a memory. The laughter of my children echoing in the hallways, the warmth of family dinners, the tears shed in quiet rooms. I could almost hear them now, like ghosts lingering around, unwilling to leave. And yet, my own flesh and blood had treated it all as a transaction. He had not just sold a property, he had sold my history, my roots, my very identity. I rose from bed and walked toward the living room. The dim light of the lamp illuminated the worn-out furniture, the framed photographs on the wall, and the familiar smell of home. My eyes landed on the picture of my late husband. His eyes, frozen in that old photograph, seemed to pierce through me, asking me what I was going to do. He had always been the pillar of strength, the one who protected us. But now it was just me, and I was left to navigate a betrayal I could have never imagined. I touched the frame, whispering softly, as if he could hear me, "What would you do if you were here? Would you forgive him? Or would you fight back?" My heart wavered between anger and sorrow. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand answers, to take back what was rightfully mine. Another part wanted to crawl into myself and disappear from the weight of it all. But I couldn't disappear. Not now. Not when everything was at stake. The next morning, I gathered my courage and called a lawyer. My hands shook as I dialed the number, but I knew I had to do it. The man on the other end of the line listened patiently as I explained the situation, his voice calm yet tinged with concern. He told me we needed to check the legality of the sale, whether my son had forged any documents or manipulated something behind my back. Hearing those words sent a chill down my spine. The thought that my own son might have gone as far as forging my signature felt like a knife twisting deeper into the wound. Later that day, my son came over, uninvited, as though he still had the right to walk into this house without knocking. His confidence filled the room like a stench. He tossed his jacket on the chair, looked at me, and smiled faintly, as if nothing had happened. "So, have you thought about what I said? You should be happy, Mom. This money will last you. You don't need a house this big. You're better off downsizing." The audacity in his words made my chest tighten. My hands trembled, but I steadied my voice. "You had no right. This house wasn't just bricks and wood. It was my life. Your father's life. And you sold it without asking me." He shrugged, dismissive, like a spoiled child brushing off a scolding. "You're overreacting. It's done. You can't change it now. The deal is sealed, the papers are signed, and the money is already moving. Don't fight what you can't undo." My heart sank, but beneath the sorrow, a fire was building. He thought I would accept this. He thought I would sit quietly, defeated, while he stripped me of everything. But he underestimated me. The days that followed were filled with an unsettling tension. The lawyer confirmed my worst fear, the documents bore my forged signature. My son had crossed the line from betrayal to crime. The evidence was there, black ink on white paper, a cruel reminder that he had chosen greed over blood. I sat in silence after hearing it, tears slipping down my cheeks. My mind raced with conflicting emotions. How had it come to this? Where had I gone wrong as a mother? How could the boy I had held in my arms, the boy I had nursed through fevers, celebrated birthdays with, turned into someone who would do this? My chest ached with grief, but the anger inside me only grew stronger. When I confronted him with the truth, his reaction was cold, almost rehearsed. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, his expression hardened. "What's done is done, Mom. You can try to fight it, but do you really want to drag your own son into court? Do you really want to destroy what's left of this family?" Those words cut deeper than any knife. He was weaponizing the very bond that once held us together. He thought my love would keep me silent. He thought my loyalty as a mother would bind me to his crime. That night, sleep escaped me once again. I sat by the window, watching the dark sky, listening to the faint hum of the city outside. My heart felt heavy, but my spirit began to shift. I couldn't allow this injustice to stand. If I stayed quiet, I would lose not only the house but also the last shred of respect for myself. And maybe, just maybe, by standing up, I could force him to see the magnitude of what he had done. I picked up the phone and called the lawyer again, my voice steadier this time. I told him I wanted to pursue action, no matter how painful it might be. He assured me we had a case, but warned me it wouldn't be easy. It would mean exposing my son, dragging family matters into the public eye, enduring the whispers of neighbors and the judgment of strangers. But I didn't care anymore. The betrayal had already stripped me of dignity. Now I needed justice. The following days were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and hushed conversations. Each time I walked into the lawyer's office, I felt both dread and determination weighing on me. I was preparing for a battle I never thought I would have to fight, a battle against my own child. And yet, despite the pain, a strange strength began to grow within me. For the first time in years, I felt the fire of resilience, the same fire that had kept me going after my husband's death, the same fire that had allowed me to raise my children alone. I realized that even though my son had betrayed me, I wasn't powerless. I still had a voice, and I still had the will to fight. But deep down, a question gnawed at me. Was this truly about the house? Or was it about the years of sacrifices he had ignored, the love he had taken for granted, the respect he had never shown? Maybe this was the reckoning I had been avoiding, the moment where the illusions I held about family loyalty would finally shatter. As I sat in the quiet of my living room, the weight of the coming storm pressing down on me, I whispered once more to the picture of my husband. "I'll fight, not just for this house, but for myself. For the years we built together. For everything that matters." The shadows around me seemed to thicken, as though the house itself was listening, waiting to see what would unfold. And deep within, I knew this was only the beginning. The battle had just begun, and the end was nowhere in sight.